Have you ever judged a person by their shoes, the scuffed leather, the worn-out soles, the faint creases that tell stories of miles walked in silence? Most of us have. But what if those shoes belonged to someone who could decide the course of your future, someone whose power stretched far beyond the surface you thought you saw? Caroline Whitford knew the weight of judgment. From her office on the 55th floor of Whitford Tower, the Chicago skyline stretched endlessly before her. Glass and steel shimmered like a kingdom her father had built from nothing. Harold Whitford, the name still carried power. He had been a titan in hospitality, raising an empire of hotels and fine restaurants with his relentless drive. Yet his beginning had been humbler than anyone dared remember. He'd scrubbed dishes in a back kitchen, hands raw from soap and steel wool, long before his name ever appeared on marble plaques. To Caroline, that legacy felt less like a crown and more like a shadow. She wore her tailored suits like armor, her hair pinned back so tightly it left no room for softness. At board meetings, she spoke with precision, her voice steady, her smile practiced. And when the room went quiet, she often wondered, were they listening to her or to the ghost of Harold Whitford still commanding the empire through her? At night, the mask slipped. She would catch her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass, her face half lit by the city glow, and whisper her father's words aloud. "The soul of this company isn't up here, Caroline. It's down there where the laundry runs, where the pots clatter, where the names no one remembers are spoken." He had believed it so fiercely that once a year, even as CEO, he vanished into his own establishments, working as a cook, a bellhop, a janitor. He called it his reality check. To Caroline, it sounded like madness. Until the silence of her penthouse nights pressed too heavy to ignore. What if she did the same? What if she stepped down from the glass tower, stripped away the armor, and walked into her father's world? Not as his heir, but as invisible flesh and blood. Her advisors would call it reckless. Her COO would likely have a heart attack. But the idea had already taken root, dangerous and alive. And like her father before her, she couldn't resist the pull of truth. And so, a plan began to form quietly, dangerously. Caroline Whitford, CEO, would vanish. In her place, a new woman would emerge, Carrie, a waitress with nothing but worn shoes, a sparse resume, and a story of drifting from job to job. She would take her place on the floor of the Aurelius, the crown jewel of her family's empire. Not to be seen, but to see. Because somewhere in the steam of the kitchen and the hum of the dining room, she hoped to find the soul of her father's legacy, and perhaps her own. The name on her apron was no longer Caroline Whitford. It was Carrie Whitman, 29 years old, a drifter who had worked just about everywhere and belonged nowhere. That was the story on the patched resume human resources had slipped into the system. A few short lines, sparse details, and just enough plausibility to pass. The first step into the Aurelius was not through its grand marble lobby or its chandelier-lit dining hall, but through a narrow steel door in a grimy back alley. The air there carried no perfume of fine dining. It was bleach and frying oil sweat and cigarettes, an entirely different fragrance of empire. The alley echoed with the slam of delivery trucks, the clatter of crates, and the barking of orders in a dozen accents. Inside, the kitchen felt alive in a way the boardroom never did. Flames leapt from pans, knives struck, cutting boards with machine gun rhythm, steam hissed like a constant warning. The noise pressed close, a heartbeat too fast for comfort. Carrie stepped carefully, clutching her apron like a shield. She felt small, clumsy, out of rhythm, an intruder in a world that demanded precision. And then came Monica Russo. Her black uniform was immaculate, pressed so sharply it could have cut glass. Her dark hair was coiled into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her face taut. And her smile, if it could be called that, was thin-curved, not in warmth, but in challenge. Her eyes raked over Carrie in a slow, deliberate sweep, pausing on the worn-out soles of her shoes. "So," Monica said, voice low and clipped, "you're the new girl. Carrie Wright Human Resources seems to think you're special enough to fast-track. Don't expect me to believe in guardian angels." She shoved a thin apron into Carrie's hands. "Your station's the back corridor. Water-bread buzzing tables. You don't speak to the guests unless they speak to you. And for God's sake, try not to look like you've just stepped off a bus station bench." Carrie felt the barb like a lash. The CEO in her wanted to fire Monica on the spot, to summon legal and HR in a storm of polished authority. But Carrie, the waitress, lowered her eyes and murmured, "Yes, ma'am." "It's Monica," the manager snapped, voice like cracked ice. "We're not in the army." And then she was gone. Heels clicking against tile, leaving behind a silence sharper than the insult itself. The shift that followed was a blur of chaos. Plates stacked higher than her shoulder glasses, polished until her fingers ached, pitchers of water that felt heavier with every trip down the aisle. Carrie's body, accustomed to yoga mats and fitness trainers, screamed in protest. Sweat clung to her hairline, dampened the collar of her thrift store shirt. The waitstaff moved around her like dancers weaving in practice steps, while she stumbled through the choreography with all the grace of a newcomer. It was during one frantic pass through the service corridor that she nearly lost it, an overloaded tray, tilting dangerously in her hands. She froze, panic in her chest. Then a steady hand reached out, catching the edge and righting it with effortless ease. "First day," the voice was warm, patient. She turned. The man was in his late 50s, his hair touched with gray, his eyes kind and crinkled from years of smiles. His name tag read, Daniel. He moved with calm, practiced grace, polishing silverware as if he'd done it his whole life. "Is it that obvious?" Carrie asked, trying to catch her breath. Daniel chuckled softly. "Everyone looks like that on their first day. Don't worry, it gets easier." He slid a protein bar into her palm, subtle enough that no one else noticed. "You'll need this." Monica's not exactly generous with breaks. Carrie managed a smile, small but grateful. For a moment, the ache in her muscles, the sting of Monica's words, and the suffocating pace of the kitchen eased. Daniel reminded her of her father, steady, humane, a quiet anchor in a storm of clamor. But across the room, Monica watched from the shadows, her lips curved into that thin, cutting smile. She had found her target, and she wasn't about to let go. For 2 weeks, Carrie worked in the shadows of the Aurelius, her body aching from 12-hour shifts, her hands roughened by endless polishing. She had learned the rhythms of the floor, the silent glances, the coded nods, the choreography of service. Yet beneath the practiced grace, she felt something off. The numbers didn't add up. Every night, gratuities were collected into a pool, then redistributed among the staff. In theory, it was fair. But Carrie's sharp mind, trained on balance sheets and billion-dollar deals, couldn't ignore the patterns. Her take-home was consistently short by a few dollars, sometimes 20. Small enough to dismiss, unless you had an eye for numbers. And she did. Whispers reached her ears in locker rooms and dark corners of the kitchen. Younger servers spoke in hushed tones about missing hours on paychecks. Busboys grumbled that their tips were thinner than they should be. No one dared speak openly. Fear clung to the air like grease on steel. Daniel noticed her frown one night as she counted her envelope. "Don't waste your energy trying to make sense of it," he muttered, voice low so no one else could hear. "We've all tried. Somehow it's always less than it should be." Carrie hesitated, then pressed softly, "Doesn't anyone report it?" He gave a sad smile, shaking his head. "Report it to who? To Monica. She's the one with the keys to the safe." "And corporate?" His voice held a bitter laugh. "They don't step down here anymore. Not since your father." Her chest tightened. "Your father?" He didn't know. Harold Whitford, the man Daniel remembered, had once walked these halls. He used to stop by back in the day. Daniel continued, eyes distant. Knew my wife's name. Asked about my son. When my first grandchild was born, he sent a gift. He cared. The heart of this place was alive back then. But now... His voice trailed off, heavy with resignation. That night, Carrie didn't leave with the others. She lingered, feigning a forgotten bag in her locker, until the restaurant grew silent. The dining room lay cloaked in dim light, silverware gleaming like faint stars. From the back hallway she saw at Monica's office, its glass walls glowing faintly from a desk lamp. Carrie pressed herself into the shadows, her pulse quickening. Through the glass, Monica sat alone, her movements sharp and precise. She separated the night's receipts, stacking bills with swift fingers. First, she entered the credit card tips into the payroll system. Then, she counted the cash slips pursed. Carrie's eyes narrowed. The stack was thick, and then there it was. Monica paused, glanced over her shoulder, then slid a neat bundle of 20s into her purse. Smooth, practiced, as if she had done it 100 times before. Carrie's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she slipped her phone from her apron pocket, angling the lens through a gap between a potted plant and the glass wall. The screen shook in her grip, but it was enough. 30 seconds. Clear enough to capture the betrayal. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it might give her away. She pressed against the wall, swallowing her fury as Monica zipped her bag shut, her face calm, almost smug. It wasn't just cruelty. It wasn't just humiliation. This was theft, systemic theft. From Daniel, who saved every dollar for his grandson's tuition. From Maria, the hostess who worked 2 jobs to care for her sick mother. From every exhausted soul who gave their blood and sweat to this place. Carrie slipped her phone back into her pocket, her hands clammy. The floor beneath her seemed to tilt. For the first time, she understood the true rot beneath the glittering facade of the Aurelius. The restaurant was no longer just a dining hall. It was a stage where appearances were worshipped, while dignity was quietly stolen in the dark. And for Caroline Whitford, hidden as Carrie, it was the moment when unease hardened into rage. The news spread like wildfire through the staff corridors. Victor Hale was coming. The man was a legend in Silicon Valley, a mercurial billionaire whose innovations had reshaped how Americans lived, traveled, even slept. Now he wanted to fuse technology with hospitality, and the Whitford partnership would be his golden doorway into the industry. One dinner at the Aurelius would seal the billion-dollar deal. For the staff, the announcement felt like a summons from royalty. Monica Russo treated it as divine decree. She prowled the dining hall like a general before battle, her eyes sharp, her voice slicing the air. Polish every glass until it disappears. Fold those napkins as if your life depends on it. I don't want a single wrinkle, not a single speck of dust. Do you understand me? Then her gaze fell on Carrie. The sneer came like clockwork. You back to the kitchen. You won't step foot in that dining room tonight. Victor Hale is not here to see this. Her hand gestured vaguely at Carrie's plain second-hand uniform, at the shoes, whose leather had long since surrendered their shine. Your brand of shabby chic doesn't belong within 10 feet of him. Carrie nodded, silent, though her stomach twisted. Somewhere deep inside, Caroline Whitford, the CEO, wanted to laugh at the irony. But Carrie, the waitress, lowered her head and retreated into the steam and clang of the dish pit. When evening fell, the restaurant gleamed. The Aurelius was transformed into a temple of perfection, crystal chandeliers blazing silver, catching candlelight, the Chicago skyline twinkling through glass like a jeweled backdrop. Guests whispered in anticipation. Then, as if on cue, Victor Hale strode in with his entourage. He was exactly as the magazines described, tall, trim, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit, worth more than a year's wages for most of the staff. His dark eyes flicked across the room with restless impatience, as though he were measuring every second in dollars. Behind him trailed two associates, both younger, both carrying themselves with the smug swagger of men who believed that they owned the world. Monica herself escorted them to the most coveted table in alcove, with a panoramic view of Chicago's lights. She poured charm like wine, her smile dazzling, her voice dripping deference. For an hour, service moved with clockwork precision. The staff moved like dancers in a well-rehearsed ballet. Carrie watched from the kitchen doors, polishing glass after endless glass, her arms moving automatically, while her eyes lingered on Hale. This is the man who will decide the future of Whitford hospitality, she thought. And he has no idea the woman scrubbing wine stems in the back room is the one whose signature he's waiting for. Then came the disaster. A young waiter barely out of his teens carried a tray bearing a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, older than he was worth more than a month's rent. His hands trembled. As he approached Hale's table, another server rushed past, brushing him just enough to break his balance. The bottle tilted, the crimson arc spilled across white linen, splashing onto the shirt of one of Hale's associates. The gasp was collective. A hush fell, followed by a string of curses from the stained man. The young waiter froze, pale with terror. Monica descended like a hawk. Her voice cut low, vicious. "Incompetent fool. Get to the back, now." Her hand nearly shoved the trembling boy away. Then, in a whiplash turn, she faced Hale with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. "Mr. Hale, I am dreadfully sorry. We will, of course, cover your expenses, the dry cleaning, everything. Allow me to make it right." The associate dabbed furiously at his shirt, his scowl thunderous. Hale barely looked up from his phone, his voice flat with irritation. "Just bring us another bottle." Monica's mask cracked. All her best waiters were occupied. The junior staff were terrified. Her eyes darted like a trapped animal, searching until they landed on the kitchen doors. On Carrie, the look was venom mixed with desperation. She jerked her head. "You! Out here! Now!" Carrie's heart jolted. Her palms slicked with sweat as she set down her polishing cloth. She pushed through the swinging doors into the dining hall, the quiet like a slap after the chaos of the kitchen. 100 eyes seemed to follow her as she approached Hale's table, her step steady though her stomach twisted. She bowed slightly, retrieving a clean napkin to blot the spill from the linen. Hale waved a dismissive hand without looking up. One of his associates, smirking, leaned toward the man with the stained shirt. "Look at this one. They must be desperate. Where do you think she got those shoes, a charity bin?" The other chuckled cruelly. "Bet she doesn't even make enough to buy new laces." Carrie's breath caught just for a second. She glanced up, met Hale's eyes. He had heard. And yet, nothing. No rebuke, no disapproval. Just indifference, as if the insult were beneath his notice. Her chest tightened. A chill swept through her bones. She steadied herself, lifted the fresh bottle, and poured with precision. Years of boardroom composure guided her hands. The wine flowed in a perfect stream. But one of Hale's men extended his polished shoe just slightly into the narrow aisle. Carrie stepped back, her heel caught, and she stumbled. The bottle tilted, only a few drops fell, tiny red blooms against the spotless white cloth. Nothing more. Yet it was enough. "That's it." Monica's voice cracked like a whip. Her facade shattered, rage spilling out unchecked. "You are a disaster, an embarrassment to this restaurant." Her fingers clamped onto Carrie's arm, digging like claws. "You're fired. Get out. Get your things and get out of my sight now." The dining hall froze. Guests turned to stare, some with pity, some with cruel curiosity. Hale's associates smirked in satisfaction. Hale himself looked on with detached boredom, as though the spectacle were a minor diversion before dessert. Carrie's face burned crimson. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel the weight of every eye, the whispers crawling across the room like fire. She did not plead. She did not argue. She pulled her arm free, her expression unreadable. "Fine." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. And then she turned not toward the kitchen, but toward the front doors. Past the marble pillars, past the grand floral arrangements, past the stairs and the whispers. Out into the cool Chicago night. She did not look back. Inside, Monica forced a triumphant smile as she turned back to Hale's table. "My sincerest apologies. The problem has been dealt with. Allow me to offer you dessert on the house." But the woman she had cast aside was no ordinary waitress. She had just fired her own executioner. Morning came draped in unease. The Aurelius was closed to the public, its grand doors locked, a sign posted "Private Corporate Event." Inside, the staff gathered in the dining hall, murmuring nervously. Waiters, bussers, cooks, dishwashers, every one of them summoned to a mandatory meeting at 10 sharp. Monica Russo moved among them with her chin held high, her uniform pressed to perfection, her lipstick sharp as a blade. To her, this was no mystery. Corporate had heard about the Victor Hale dinner, about her swift handling of disaster. Today, she was certain, was her reward. Perhaps a promotion. Perhaps her name finally etched among the rising stars of Whitford hospitality. Daniel Tran stood near the window, arms folded, eyes uneasy. He searched the crowd for Carrie, the waitress, who had vanished into the night. Guilt weighed on him. He should have spoken up, defended her. But Carrie was nowhere to be seen. At precisely 10 o'clock, the front doors opened. George Latham, the COO, strode in with a cluster of executives, their faces stern, unreadable. Behind them came Victor Hale and his 2 associates, impeccably dressed expectation, written in their impatient glares. Hale checked his watch and then looked to George. "Let's get this over with," he said briskly. "Where's your CEO? I was told I'd finally meet Caroline Whitford." And then the doors opened once more. Every head turned. The air shifted heavy and electric. She stepped inside like a storm contained in flesh. Caroline Whitford, no longer Carrie the waitress. Her navy power suit was cut sharp, her blonde hair pinned in an elegant twist, her stride steady and commanding. The room fell silent, a collective gasp sweeping across the staff. Monica's painted smile faltered, then collapsed. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ghost pale. The waitress she had mocked, belittled, humiliated, fired, stood revealed as the woman who owned the building, the company, the future of them all. Victor Hale stiffened, color rising to his cheeks. His associates exchanged frantic looks, the memory of their mocking words crashing down on them like a tidal wave. Caroline walked to the front of the room and paused, her eyes sweeping across the staff, every nervous glance, every stunned face. Then she spoke, her voice calm, steady, carrying the authority of her father's legacy. "Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Caroline Whitford. I am the CEO of Whitford Hospitality." The words landed like thunder. Jaws dropped. Murmurs rippled through the staff. Daniel's eyes widened, tears threatening as realization dawned. Caroline continued, her tone sharpening. "For weeks I worked here among you. I carried trays, scrubbed glasses, endured the same long hours, the same back-breaking work. And in that time, I saw 2 sides of the Aurelius. I saw dedication, resilience, kindness, the soul of this company that my father built. But I also saw cruelty. I saw humiliation. I saw fear used as a tool." Her gaze locked on Monica Russo. Monica trembled, words fumbling at her lips. "As Carrie the waitress you despised, I was mocked for my shoes, my apron, my very presence. I was denied fair tables, stripped of dignity, treated as less than human. And when I stumbled after being deliberately tripped, you dragged me into the dining room and fired me before strangers. Gasps, whispers, staff exchanging wide-eyed looks of recognition. Caroline reached into her pocket and withdrew her phone. With a nod, one of the executives connected it to the projector. A grainy video flickered across the wall. The room watched in silence as Monica, alone in her office, slid neat stacks of cash into her purse. The image was shaky but undeniable. The reaction was explosive. Shouts of disbelief, cries of anger. The younger staff exchanged glances of bitter vindication, so it was true. Caroline's voice rang like iron. For theft from your staff. For fostering a culture of fear and disrespect. Monica Russo, your employment is terminated. Effective immediately. 2 security guards stepped forward. Monica's lips trembled, her hands shaking as she stammered, I was maintaining standards. Her words were swallowed by the silence of the room. She was escorted out, her heels clicking hollow against the marble floor. Caroline let the moment hang and then turned slowly toward Victor Hale. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably for the first time, looking small beneath the weight of her gaze. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice low, resonant. We were scheduled to sign a partnership this morning, a deal that would link our brands for the next decade. But last night, I was nobody. Just a waitress in worn-out shoes. And in that moment, I saw your character. She reached for the bound contract resting on the table. Hale's throat tightened as she lifted it, her hand steady. This partnership, she said, pausing long enough for silence to stretch, is canceled. The contract fell from her hand, hitting the floor with a soft, definitive thud. The sound echoed louder than any shout. A billion-dollar deal extinguished in a heartbeat. The dining hall erupted in whispers, the staff exchanging stunned glances, Hale's associates paling as though the ground had vanished beneath them. Monica was gone. The billionaire was broken, and standing in the center of it all, Caroline Whitford had never looked stronger. For a long moment, silence clung to the air like smoke. The contract lay sprawled across the carpet, its golden lettering catching the light, now nothing more than a broken promise. All eyes turned to Victor Hale. The man who had walked in with the swagger of a king now sat exposed, stripped bare of arrogance. His phone was no shield now. His eyes, restless and sharp only hours before, glistened with something raw shame. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. His voice, when it came, was rougher than the polished tone the press knew so well. Ms. Whitford. Caroline. He paused, swallowing hard. There are moments in life when the mirror turns, when you see yourself as you really are. Last night, this morning, that mirror found me. He drew a shaky breath. I grew up with nothing. My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned houses. I wore second-hand clothes that never fit, and I remember the sting, the shame of being looked down on. I swore I'd never be poor again. I built an empire so no one could ever make me feel small. But somewhere along the way, his voice faltered. He looked at his 2 associates, their smugness gone, their eyes downcast. I became them. Arrogant, entitled, blind. The staff stared, their anger mingling with an unexpected silence. For the first time, they saw not a billionaire, but a man broken open. Caroline's gaze remained steady, cool as tempered steel. Regret is easy, Mr. Hale. Shame burns hot in the moment, but it fades. The real test isn't how you act today while the world is watching. It's what you do when the world looks away. Her words hung heavy. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Don't send me proposals. Send me proof. Change your culture. Treat your people with dignity. Then we'll talk." Hale's head bowed. He gave the smallest of nods, humbled beyond recognition. It was not forgiveness, but it was a challenge. A mountain to climb. And he seemed to know its worth. Caroline turned, then not to Hale, not to the executives, but to the gathered staff. Their faces, once weary, now brimmed with expectation. Her voice softened, carrying warmth that reached even to the back of the room. "In my time here, there was one person who reminded me of my father. One person who, without knowing who I was, defended the memory of what Whitford hospitality was meant to be." She scanned the crowd until her eyes found him. Daniel Tran, standing quietly near the back. His weathered hands clasped his eyes, glistening with disbelief. "Daniel," she said, smiling gently, "your kindness, your integrity, your quiet strength. You were the keeper of this restaurant's soul when others forgot it. And it is my honor to appoint you as the new general manager of the Aurelius, effective immediately." For a second, Daniel stood frozen, as if the words hadn't quite reached him. Then the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar of joy. Cooks cheered, bussers clapped, waiters shouted his name. Some even embraced him, slapping his back, their faces shining with tears and laughter. Daniel covered his mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. His shoulders shook, tears streaming freely now. He looked at Caroline through the blur of celebration, mouthing words only she could see. "Thank you." Caroline let the moment swell, then raised her hand, gently guiding the room back to quiet. This change will not stop here. Today marks a new beginning, not just for the Aurelius, but for every single one of our 50,000 employees worldwide. Effective immediately, we are launching 3 new initiatives. She held up one finger. First, a complete overhaul of management training. From now on, promotions will not be earned by numbers alone, but by peer reviews and by proven ability to lead with empathy. A manager who cannot build respect will not lead. Not here. Not ever again. A second finger. Second, the Whitford Integrity Line. An anonymous third-party hotline where any employee can report harassment, theft, or abuse without fear of retaliation. Every single report will go straight to the top of corporate, to me. And I will listen. A third finger, her voice softening with emotion. And finally, to honor my father's legacy, we are creating the Harold Whitford Founders Award. Every year, one employee, whether a housekeeper, a cook, a porter, or a server, will be chosen by their peers for embodying integrity and kindness. That employee will receive a $50,000 bonus and an all-expenses-paid vacation for their family at any Whitford property in the world. Gasps. Cheers. Some staff covered their mouths in shock, others clutched each other, laughing through tears. It was more than they ever dreamed. For the first time in years, the heart of the Aurelius beat strong again. When the clamor of celebration faded, when the applause had quieted, and the crowd dispersed to whispers of hope, Caroline found herself alone. The Aurelius stood still at last. The chandeliers dimmed the silverware, silent, the echoes of voices retreating into memory. She wandered through the kitchen, past the stations where flames once danced, past the counters, slick with the ghosts of 1,000 hurried meals. Her hand brushed lightly against a folded dish towel forgotten on a prep table. The faint blotch of red wine still marked its fibers, a reminder of the night's humiliation and the stumble that nearly broke her disguise. She let her fingers linger there, her throat tight, her eyes misted. Not with pain, but with understanding. Her father's soul hadn't vanished when he passed. It hadn't slipped away into boardrooms or faded into corporate reports. It was here, always here, hidden in the small acts of kindness that men like Daniel carried like torches through the darkness. It had been waiting patient and steady for her to notice. She exhaled slowly, a release of years of doubt, of the gnawing fear that she was only a shadow walking in Harold Whitford's footsteps. Tonight, she had not only protected his legacy, she had found her own. Beyond the kitchen doors, dawn crept over Chicago. The city glowed soft and golden, the first rays of sun glinting off glass towers and quiet streets. Caroline paused in the doorway, her silhouette framed against the light. Stronger now. Certain. Human. And then the voice of the storyteller carries us out with a truth as gentle as it is unshakable. In a world obsessed with appearances, true worth is revealed in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. Caroline Whitford went undercover, searching for her father's legacy. And instead, she discovered her own. The camera lingers on her steady gaze. The quiet music swells strings and piano tender resolute. The screen softens to the Chicago skyline at dawn. And before it fades to black, one final invitation. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs reminding of the power of kindness. And tell us in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised by who they truly were? We'd love to hear your story. And if you'd like more tales that reveal the hidden soul of everyday life, subscribe and join us here. Because sometimes the most powerful truths are found in the places we least expect. Fade to silence.